Today's the day that all us cats must surely do our bit. We all must do our share so Uncle Sam can hit. Save up all your pots and pans. Save up every little thing you can. Don't give it away. Get some cash for your trash, yeah. Save up all that old newspaper. Save and pile it like a high skyscraper. Don't give it away. Get some cash for your trash. In between, we'll do some loving. White, handsome turtle doving. Will you listen to me, honey? Get plenty of the folding money. Save up all your iron and tin. But when you go to turn it in, don't give it away. Get some cash for your trash. Say in between we'll do some loving, white handsome turtle doving. When you listen to me, honey, get plenty of the folding money. Save up all your iron and tin. But when you go to turn it in, don't give it away, no, no. Get some cash, get some cash, get some cash for your trash. Get plenty of it, too.
Thank you, Woody, for that great song. I love it. Joe, can you tell us who that was?
Yes. Am I still on?
Yep.
All right. That's Waller with Cash for Your Trash.
Yeah, that was a great one, Woody. Thank you so much for that. Welcome to our fantastic MVY Radio. Well, hopefully it's going to be fantastic. Community conversation, walking through the Vineyard's Climate Action Plan. It's going to be a panel series. It's going to take place for the next 5 Mondays, including tonight, with a wonderful panel each week. I want to thank Liz Durkee, who is the Climate Action Planner for the Martha's Vineyard Commission, who's helped me formulate and plan these Monday nights. Tonight, we are going to do consumption and waste. We have a fantastic panel, which I will introduce to you momentarily. And hopefully you'll share this from week to week. Every Monday at no later than 5 o'clock. It's usually going to go out on Sunday. There'll be a link on our homepage. Just scroll down a little bit and it'll be there, just like you found it tonight. And bring your questions, as always. We are recording these, so every, hopefully Tuesday night, they will be posted on our community outreach page at mvyradio.org. And you can watch it or share it, and they'll be there in forever. So I also want to just make mention of today being the first ever Massachusetts North Atlantic Right Whale Day. So it's something that has been in the works for just a couple of years. It fast-tracked, and obviously people really do care about our whales, and they are so endangered. We're really happy to announce that and make everybody aware of that if you didn't already know. Also, coming up on Sunday, May 7th, is going to be the Climate Action Plan, the Vineyard Way, which is who we're partnering with for this series. There's going to be a climate action fair at the Ag Hall from 12 to 4, and you can see we're going to put on our Facebook page and on our homepage, we're going to put the flyer up. And I'm sure, Liz, is there a place that they can go to read more about this?
You can go to thevineyardway.org.
Perfect. Thevineyardway.org. Duh. That's the website we're going to be talking about constantly and consistently, where you can go and get a deeper dive into our island's climate action plan, because this has been a long time in the making. 100 people were involved in this, and I'm going to have Liz talk about a little bit about that in a moment. But we're going to spend the next 5 weeks bringing out some of the finer points. So I want to just draw attention to anybody who would like to listen to this in a different language. You can go to the captions down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and of course hit captions, and then choose the language that you would like it translated to. If you're with someone that is not understanding my English right now, maybe you could convey that to them as well. I want to thank our sponsors here at MVY Radio of this event: Cape Light Compact, Falmouth Marine, Northern Trust, Cedar Construction and Property Management, Sea-Tow Cape and Islands and Sea-Tow Rhode Island, and Zoe and Company Professional Bra Fitters for their underwriting support for this nonprofit and listener-supported radio station. We're so proud of our role to be able to be a voice for the community, to amplify things like this. It's just such an important thing. And also, before I introduce our panelists, I would like to do a land acknowledgement that was vetted by Carol Vandal and the Tribal Council. We acknowledge the land where we live. It is the ancestral homeland of the Wampanoag tribe, the first island community and caretakers of Noepe. We acknowledge that the land and the First Nation people are one and the same and cannot be divided. So thank you for our panelists and the topic of conversation, which is it feeds into everything in our community, every aspect of life: climate change, which is undeniable, which you will discover over these next 5 weeks from our very intelligent, well-informed, and active human beings here on Martha's Vineyard that are doing so much, and which include Liz Durkee, who is my other co-pilot along with Joe Stickles from MVY. Thank you, Joe. Liz is the Martha's Vineyard Commission's first ever climate change coordinator, and before this job she was the Oak Bluffs conservation agent for 22 years, and she's also a former MVY radioer from way back at the beginning. As we get ready to celebrate 40 years, Liz was on the air here back in the very first years of MVY radio. So MVY sister, had to say that. But all the way back to 2011, her deep interest in climate change resulted in a 15-part series in the Vineyard Gazette on climate change on Martha's Vineyard back in the 80s. So yeah, she was the DJ at MVY here. Woody Filley, if you can give a little wave. MV Food Waste Initiative is what he's a part of. He started working with a group born out of the Island League of Women Voters that received a grant to build recycling into an island-wide town-supported program. Woody, thank you. That program was absorbed with the creation of the island-wide waste district. After retiring as the tech director at the Martha's Vineyard Regional High School, he saw the opportunity to get involved again and with waste on the island, this time through the support of the Vineyard Vision Fellowship in the areas of food waste and construction and, well, I'm just looking this up because I want to make sure that I'm not, construction and demolition waste. Mary Sage Napolitan, am I saying that correctly, Mary Sage? Yeah. Is the regenerative landscape manager at the Island Grown Initiative Farm, where she manages farm spaces and functions outside of cultivation. Her work focuses on landscape planning and maintenance in support of accessibility, ecological health, native biodiversity, and perennial food production, and she oversees the environmental management and monitoring of the food waste composting program on the site. And we have also Alyson Malik, who is the library director for the Oak Bluffs Library. And she's here to talk not only about the role that libraries play in creating and maintaining sustainable communities, but also to talk a bit about her childhood overseas. Has a very interesting perspective to share where, out of necessity, sharing and repairing was a way of life. And we have Ben Robinson, who was born and raised on Martha's Vineyard. You have seen it all, Ben, and he's now raising a family here of his own. His public work over the last decade has focused on planning issues and increasingly focused on the changes that we're witnessing and will see due to the global disruption from human impacts on the environment. And also as a member of the Martha's Vineyard Commission and Tisbury Planning Board, as well as chairing the Climate Action Task Force, it has been a privilege and an honor to serve our community, is something that he has said. So thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate, again, as Liz was saying before, I appreciate so much your willingness to share on this platform, our MVY radio platform. We're very proud to be able to offer this to the community, and even more excited to have such knowledgeable human beings helping us tell this story of the Vineyard Way. So, Liz, do you have anything else as far as opening remarks that you would like to make? Tell us about maybe the climate, how the climate action plan came to be.
Well, sure. Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Laurel and MVY and all the panelists and everyone listening for this. I'm really excited to dig into the issues that we addressed in the Climate Action Plan, and to look at the island through a climate lens, which is something we all should be doing. The Climate Action Plan was developed by over 100 local residents. It's a 20-year regional plan. There are 6 thematic areas. We're going to be looking at 5 of them during this series. The first one is consumption and waste. And we named the Climate Action Plan the Vineyard Way, connected to our past, committed to our future. We felt that was appropriate because we're an island who really cares about each other, and we really care about our environment. And I hope you will enjoy this evening and go to the Climate Action Fair on May 7th.
Absolutely. There's going to be so many things happening there, and you can go to thevineyardway.org. We put it in the chat so everybody can look at that if you want to, again, take a deeper dive or just get the information about this wonderful climate action fair happening a week from this coming Monday. It's going to be May already. So without further hesitation or delay, let's dive into the consumption aspect of our topic tonight, consumption and waste. And Ben, I'd love to start with you just to kind of get the meaning of what we mean by when we're talking about consumption and why it's a climate change issue.
Thanks, Laurel. It's foundational, really, to climate change. Consumption and waste. You can talk about materials and you can talk about energy. They're both vital for our daily lives. We use them every day, but we're overusing them. Our planet cannot sustain the amount of consumption and waste that we're producing. And it's not just that we're overusing it, but we're creating new materials. So it's synthetic consumption as well. Taking fossil fuels and turning it into all sorts of synthetics creates a waste that doesn't break down anymore in the environment like it used to. And so when we think about climate change and the effects that humans are having on this planet, consumption and waste is the centerpiece of all of that. And there's 8 billion people on the planet, but consumption and waste is not proportionally shared amongst everyone on the planet. So something that we have to focus on the Vineyard is we're squarely in the wealthy bracket of humans on this planet that consume and waste the most and have the most room to actually reduce. And so I hope what we can talk about a little bit tonight is how can people engage with this topic individually, because a lot of climate change is overwhelming, and there are little things that really add up that we can do as individuals. So when we think about consumption and waste, they're really talking about things that we can do as individuals. But then there's also many strategies that we can do as a group, as a community, as a nation, and as a world. So I hope we can span all those things, but it truly is the foundational question around how do we limit our impacts on the planet, and who should be limiting the impacts the most. And those people in the wealthiest areas, we have the most room to move. And so that's where I hope we go with this conversation. So thank you, Laurel, for having it.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that information. Maybe we can elaborate on some of the ways we can live more sustainably and consume less on the island.
Yeah, I think, concepts like circular economy the reusing of things, the sharing economy. These are concepts that we'll have to really understand. And where does your consumption start and where does it end? And how do you deal with the waste at the end product? And how can the waste become a resource instead of a burden? So there's lots of strategies to explore. And take your start. Where would you want to start?
Maybe the most simple thing we can do to make a change.
The simplest thing we can start to do is just do more with less. That is essentially the biggest thing we can do is just reduce. Forget recycling, forget everything else, reduce. That is the number one thing. It's what the IPCC report is telling us. The low-hanging fruit, the easiest thing we can do, the technology we have today, the thing that everybody can do is reduce. And we don't like to sacrifice. Nobody likes to sacrifice. But where would we be if the World War II generation hadn't sacrificed for the cause of that day? And so I think it's time for us to think about what is the sacrifice that we need to take on in our own lives so that the lives that come after us will have a chance. So I think reduce is really the most important thing. That means just choosing what do you really need? And if you really need it, where can you get it without having to purchase it? Does your neighbor have something that you could borrow? These are really simple things that communities have done for thousands of years. We've sort of lost that, and we go right to Amazon and click on, the $5 item that has to be shipped here, that we may use once, twice, and then throw away. So I think reusing what we have, reducing what we purchase, and finding where you can get that in your community are really important strategies.
Yeah, so you're even talking about, and this is going to be something covered at the Climate Action Fair a week from this Sunday, is just repairing clothes that we have, sewing, going back to the old ways of mending things that we have and resoling shoes and things, rather than, again, purchasing new stuff and being so disposable.
And don't be afraid to wear a sweater with a hole in it. Maybe not to a wedding, but every day, don't be afraid.
Especially on Martha's Vineyard, right? I mean, that is a fashion statement, right? Anyway, so what's one more thing you can talk about as far as, reduce is, there's a lot of ways we can reduce. And again, you can go to thevineyardway.org to discover some more about this. But maybe one more thing we can talk about.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, and I touched on it, synthetics. We're polluting the world. We've polluted it. Essentially, the planet is a big Superfund site at this point, with plastic pollution being, a really important one to consider. So thinking about the materials of the things that you buy, finding alternatives for synthetics is really important. So, we used to clothe ourselves and house ourselves without synthetics. And so it is possible. It's not easy. There's no doubt about it. Look around your room today, and most of what you have, the clothing you wear, the tools you have, they're all synthetics. They're all plastics. And we've got to find ways to use less of those. Now, that's not something that individuals can do. We're not going to reinvent the material marketplace, but we can choose the items that potentially will last longer and will be less made from synthetics. And plastic clothing is the easiest one. There, you can get non-plastic clothing. It does exist.
So we can vote with our choices. Liz, do you have anything you'd like to add to Ben's comments?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Ben. That was great. A couple of things just to bounce off what you said. The plastic in our clothes, comes off our clothes and we breathe it in. We're breathing in plastic, when we fold our clothes, when we wear our clothes. And, remember the days when we used to darn our socks? We would actually repair them instead of throw them away. I tried to darn a pair of socks once, and it's not that easy, but there has to be an art to it that we can learn and start doing that again. And there's this one material called viscose. Does anyone know what that is? It's apparently one of the most polluting materials that they make clothes out of. And I'd never even heard of it until recently, but a lot of really one thing we can do is buy clothes that are made out of actual real materials like cotton and linen, and buy quality clothes that are going to last. But I also wanted to talk about, we're a very materialistic society, and that's not an accident that we are. When the Industrial Revolution began, which began with fossil fuels, mass production began, and all these new products needed to be sold, and advertising kicked in. And we all know we've been exposed to billions and billions of commercials over our lifetime. And even if we don't think we pay attention to them, they get into our heads. And every one of those commercials is encouraging us to buy something. And there are 18 million people in this country who are, the term is called, let me see, they have compulsive shopping disorder, which means they're addicted to shopping, basically. And when you think about it, it used to be that we would shop when we needed something, and now we shop for fun. Shopping gives you a little high, and it makes you feel good for a little while. And we call it retail therapy, actually. It's something that we do because it makes us feel better. And also, the economists tell us when, consumer spending is up, they're happy about that, as if it's like our patriotic duty to go out and buy things. So, we're really been ingrained with this materialistic attitude in our society. And like Ben said, we really do need to think about sacrificing and looking to the common good, the good of all. There's a pair of gray Chuck Taylors that I really, really want. And I'm not going to buy them because I read this sentence in a book the other day. It says, buy less, buy only what you need, and separate needs from wants. And clothing, 10% of the global carbon emissions come from the clothing industry. Just one other interesting fact, we as consumers have a lot of power about what we buy. We have power over what we buy. And interestingly, women make 85% of consumer decisions. So, and there are over half the country is women. We can demand, that products are made not from plastic, and if we all, make that known to our merchants, if we're not buying these things, they're not going to be made.
Thank you so much, Liz. Alyson, you have a very interesting perspective. You've lived abroad where consumption habits are very different than here. So what are some examples of the way other countries practice less consumption?
So I can only really talk about the country I lived in. And this is like come full circle for my life. So I was an Aramco brat. So what that means was I was a child to an employee of Saudi Aramco. That is one of the world's biggest oil producers. So this is a little ironic that this is the topic of today's conversation, because the kind of consumption that everyone was concerned about living in Saudi Arabia during the 1980s and 90s was like, oh no, let's not reduce our energy consumption. No one cared about that. It was, let's, try to come up with creative solutions to, the needs that we have that we don't have access to. So, just the fact that you wanted to consume all this stuff was still there. It's just, you had no access to it. We could not go down to any kind of store. There was no mall to purchase stuff. As a child who grew very quickly, from the age of, 5 to 11 and goes through 15 different sizes of clothing, my parents had to try to figure out how do we literally put clothes on our children. And the answer to what this community came up with in the 80s is what we are having to do now, which is, you look around you at the expatriate community in which you're living, which, I mean, to be quite honest, when I moved to the island, I was like, I understand this. I understand what it's like to live in a sort of little pocket of people who are all in it together, who are trying to make it work. The difference is that the weather is much better here, and we have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, which I did not have when I grew up. But here's what's similar. So growing up, it was like living in a maker lab all the time. So my parents both had an incredible set of skills. My dad had a workshop, and he and the rest of all of our friends and neighbors, whenever anyone needed anything and we could not buy that thing, my dad would just go in the shop and make it. And if he didn't know how to make it, he would know someone who knew how to make it. And so they would work together to problem solve and come up with a solution. And then they would go into the shop and they would fashion it either out of wood or metal or whatever they had access to. And my mom, so she had a sewing machine. And so any kind of issue that came up clothing wise, she would just create it. And so like she was on a team of people who, so like one woman was like, hey, I used to direct plays. I could direct a play with all your kids in it. And they're like, great, let's do that. And so my mom and all of her buddies would get together and they would make all the costumes because they had to, right? We could get raw materials in town, but we couldn't go in there and say, can we buy like an entire ensemble of outfits for our children's, dance rehearsals? Like that's not available in Saudi Arabia. I don't know where that's available, in fact. But they would share skills with each other. We would have clothing swaps often, which was a necessity, because as your children grow through things, they need to have access to the next size up. And so there's not a lot of choice there. But for me as a kid, it was always so exciting when my mom came home with a big black trash bag. And she's like, your new school year clothes are here. And we'd be like, that's great. And we would like go through the bag and see what was there. And some of it were like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to wear that bright purple. It's too many sequins for me, and so like that would just go into the pile for the next swap. But this is how we got our clothes. I mean, everything I'm wearing here, I've thrifted also, just because like, I don't know if I'm allergic to buying new stuff or it's just I'm not used to it. But this was my lifestyle then. And I think that I've sort of extracted all of this and I've sort of like put it onto the library scene. So I mean, like, and I think that everyone kind of knows the roles that the libraries have been playing in terms of, sustainable options for our communities. We host everything from, like composting programs to, like learning about the environment, and we invite in expert speakers. But then of course we have a collection of materials that we call the Library of Things, literally things that you can just check out and use when you need them and then return them to the library. So you yourself do not have to purchase something that's brand new so that you could use it just the one time. So, I mean, we have tools, we have sewing machines, you can check them out. We have fishing poles, shell fishing equipment. We even have a radon detector. So, I mean, and that's just what we have at the Oak Bluffs Library, the West Tisbury Library, the Edgartown Library. They all have different things. So, go onto our catalog and just search for it. And if you're not seeing what you need, please tell us. Like, we're always looking for what can the library buy one of so that the community that we live in doesn't have to buy like 100 of them. So I think I've talked a lot, but generally I think that this is the idea, like we are in possession of a lot of different skills and a lot of different, there's a lot of access that we have, and we can use our shared economy buying power to create a resource then that everyone can have access to, so that, you don't have to go and consume more than you need to.
We do live in a very unique environment here on Martha's Vineyard, where we have so many creative people and so many makers and so many doers that it stands to reason that we could do what your father did here on Martha's Vineyard in those cases, to consume less as part of the Vineyard Way. What an incredible story to share. Thank you so much, Alyson. That was really eye-opening, and the fact that you brought that into your job over at the library and into the institution to be able to help people do just that. What a wonderful contribution to our community. Thank you so much, Alyson.
Well, thanks for inviting me to be part of this discussion.
Oh, this is exciting. Liz, do you want to add anything?
That was fascinating, Alyson. Thank you. Just an interesting childhood experience. I went online the other day to find out which credit cards that are associated with certain banks that fund fossil fuels. And I have a JP Morgan Chase credit card, and I discovered that they're the biggest funder of one of the biggest banks that fund fossil fuels. So I cut the card up and I threw it away, and I sent them an email telling them that I did that. And then I realized, my father was a lawyer who spent his entire career working for Chase Manhattan Bank, which was now JP Morgan Chase. So my entire childhood, which is owned by the Rockefellers, who were one of the first oil people, my whole childhood was really, subsidized by oils. And I was like, oh my God.
I know it's conflicting, isn't it? And now I drive, an electric car for the library, and it's just like I feel much better about that. So I'm conflicted about where this mindset came from. But
Well, it's interesting how legacy burdens heal, and how we kind of see how things are not working as children growing up, and we make those shifts for what we need to do better in the future. And I think collectively, it's really fascinating to find us here on tonight during this panel talking about these very things, because I think we all have a story we could relate to that, and why we care about the environment and things like that. My dad was a biology professor his entire career, and so I learned a lot about the environment, and I just think we all have such important stories that we need to share. So thank you again. Now we're going to kind of shift into the waste part of the conversation and talk about several different types of waste, including the food waste, solid waste, construction and demolition waste, and human waste. So Woody, I'd love to start with you and talk about how much food do we actually waste on this island?
Well, I can't give you an exact poundage, but if you look at sort of federal guidelines and stuff, they'll say 35% is sort of what we're looking at of the total municipal solid waste. And that actually gets very close to a study that was done through a program with the Vineyard Vision Fellowship and along with Island Grown Initiative. And they actually got into the weeds with the trash, opened up bags and things like that. And they came up with a number of about 6,500 tons a year.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so in the many years that you've been privy and working hard in everything that you've done for the environment here on Martha's Vineyard, have you seen any progress?
Yes, definitely. When I first started, like you said earlier, each town had its own landfill, and that was it. Great place to go visit and see people. You could get great deals there. You find all sorts of good stuff, but there was no coordination. And we started the recycling program then and started working with the different towns, and that evolved into the waste district. Landfilling, then people realized we're kind of poisoning our own water here, people. We got to do something. Then I sort of ushered in the waste to energy program. And for many years now, the waste has been shipped off, and that's turning into energy over on the Cape there. And now I think we're entering a new era. The state has started with their waste bans. They started back, probably, I think in the early 2010s. In 2014, they actually put a waste ban on food because they realized food going into landfills was creating methane gas. And they said, if you're a commercial entity and you're making more than a ton of food waste a week, you need to do something different with it. And so they created these guidelines, and sort of their feeling was, composting was one of the major alternatives for that. So that's kind of evolved now over time to sort of the next phase of the whole sort of deconstruction of waste. And I think, the waste stream and looking at it. So food waste with the waste ban there. They're working with C&D waste, construction and demolition waste. Recently, they said no more clothing, no more cloth and things like that into the waste. So the state is really kind of leading, I think, the next level of how do we manage our waste? How do we even know what our waste is? And when we look at food waste, my first feeling is food is not trash. I mean, when you think about what we're throwing away something that we can easily repackage here on Martha's Vineyard, and is actually already being done right over at Island Grown Initiative. They have a drum which they put the food waste in, and beautiful compost comes out the other end. This is a product that we're shipping a lot onto this island right now, and in fact, we can sort of handle two problems at once. We can not have to ship as much in. At the same time, we can solve our food waste problem. And when their food waste is in the garbage, because when those trucks are parked next to you, that's what smells. And that's sort of the other option there too, is as we pull food waste out of our regular municipal solid waste stream, all the other products that are in there won't be contaminated. Food can really be a problem and contaminate that. So we're going to have a win-win here. And I think that was one of the first things I think that the people who were early involved with this realized that, if we take the food out of here, we can have these benefits, and they will be, exceed. It's an easy one to get to, because 6,500 tons, that's a significant portion of the waste stream. So I think it was sort of a no-brainer to really focus on this first, but really this is only our first step of really taking care of our waste here in Martha's Vineyard.
Well, thank you, Woody, for that information, because this beautifully transitions to talk with Mary Sage right now. That, I'd love for you to, first of all, just share the mission of Island Grown Initiative, and then what you are doing to address food waste.
Absolutely. So the mission of Island Grown Initiative is to build a regenerative and equitable local food system on Martha's Vineyard. And as with all things in our food system, food waste has both social and environmental consequences that we're seeking to remedy. Sort of on the front end, we see, not just here, everywhere, but we see a lot of good edible food go wasted, while we also see that a lot of people in our community are still struggling with food insecurity, which is illogical and unjust. So on that end of things, we kind of start by trying to do what you would call food rescue. So identifying places where there's food that will potentially go to waste that could be redistributed to consumers before it actually becomes wasted. So that's things like gleaning crops from farms that the farmers aren't going to have an opportunity to get to. We've started processing and packaging up food, fish from the Derby, and venison during hunting season that can be distributed as well. And then also even just collecting, like at the end of the season, if businesses are closing and they have food products that they're not going to be able to sell or store, we're able to collect those, and all of that food can get distributed to schools and senior centers, to the food pantry, or processed into prepared meals for our community members in need. And then sort of more on the back end, as Woody talked about, we see it is when food ends up in the trash that it actually becomes waste. So the idea is that if we can separate that food from trash to begin with, it isn't wasted. It can become recycled into another valuable resource. So our role in that is, we've worked on sort of piloting this program over several years now, what that food waste separation would really look like on the island, and worked closely with Woody on that. And then now we are the main site for taking on food scraps from residents and also from restaurants, where we have our drum composter, and we're able to compost that food into a really wonderful soil amendment that allows us to continue growing more nutritious food for our community.
This makes me think about the possibility of us being able to eliminate altogether even importing compost, period. Wouldn't it be beneficial for us to have local compost that is already kind of been vetted by our own environment?
Absolutely, it would. And it's like another way of sort of closing that loop, because anytime we send food waste off island, what we're really doing is just letting go of all of those nutrients that we could be just recycling here to keep producing more good food for ourselves. And I'll also mention that we really do our best over here at Island Grown, but we do not have the capacity to compost all of the island's food waste. So it would be really lovely to see enough infrastructure on the island that we could be also creating all of the compost that we need and composting all of the food that we produce.
So it might be, food for thought for people to think about having a composting station in every single town, like the one you have, maybe, or just having people actually start a business and compost. Yes, Woody.
Well, and actually, funny you should say that. We are definitely planning for that. There were some different options looked at early on, sort of a centralized facility, but just the sheer cost and all the mechanics really made it somewhat questionable if that could be accomplished. We have a plan right now to try and add probably 3 more drums, which should be, and we can do it in phases. We look at it from a decentralized approach, and a lot of it is looking possibly to do it on farms because they are going to potentially be one of the big consumers of this material. So we have some plans coming together. We've visited a number of sites in the past, and we do have we're in the making of a business plan. So if anybody out there is interested in looking at investing in building this infrastructure, we certainly would like to talk to them. Both if people have sites themselves, farms, nurseries, things like that are pretty ideal sites for something like this. But this is something where there's really a business potential and a financial return for it, but it's also really making the difference here and really letting us capture this, solve our problem of getting it off. And so please, anybody who's out there and listening to this, contact me, and I'd be happy to share as much information as I can with you.
Oh, that's such empowering and exciting news. It really does give us all these possibilities of there's real steps we can take to be self-sufficient here on Martha's Vineyard. And we've talked about the waste, the solid waste that is going off island, but is there a number just to kind of give us an idea of just how much we're transporting off island and how much that is costing us?
Sure. So the costing part's a little hard to quantify, and it's also asking who's spending the money. But imagine 1,200 tractor trailer trucks. That's sort of pretty much in the area of what we're moving off each year. About 36 to 37,000 tons of waste is shipped off the island each year. About 22,000 of that is what they call municipal solid waste. That's sort of your household trash and things like that. The remaining is actually the construction and demolition waste, which has grown significantly over the years here. And if you look at it, most people, when they go to the landfill or local drop-off at this point, probably spending like $5 a barrel or a bag to for the tipping fee. But if you have a whole lot of stuff, you're looking at about $194. I know at the MVRD site there. So, you could do some back of the napkin calculation at $194 times 22,000 tons. It's a lot of money.
Oh my word, yes. Well, this is also a good opportunity for us to give a reminder to everyone in this community that about reduction that Ben was talking about earlier, about how we can probably cut our trash by a tremendous amount by reusing and composting and all these other ways of reducing it. Wow. So can we talk about some alternatives, beyond reduction?
Well, again, we have the composting, so that each of the local drop-off facilities have containers for homeowners to bring compost to their site, and then that gets picked up. So Bruno's is working with us. They pick up from restaurants. We have a number of restaurants. We have other commercial facilities that are already doing waste separation, organic separation. So that's the first. Obviously, if somebody wants to do something in their own backyard, I think there's going to be a demonstration at the May 7th fair. So I think that'll be people can learn about it there. But there are other devices. But if you find a local farm, I mean, for me, I have a farm right next door to me, and they take all our compost from us, and so I think that's another option. But again, I think looking at consumption, not purchasing what you don't need, And then also, for a lot of the, construction sites right now, I know a lot of times there's stuff left over, things like that. In the ideal world, we would have a great, computerized system that could let people swap online and know what's there and put out requests and things like that. Is something that we're looking at now. But so I think, those are some, but also people have a lot of their own ideas. I mean, a lot of people share different things, taking clothes to, either the thrift stores, furniture. I know Habitat for Humanity is, takes in, building materials and also furniture and things like that. Other nonprofits are taking in things. So I think a lot of different ways out there. I think really the most important thing is just having the mindset of, instead of just thinking, I'm going to throw that away, what could I do with that? And so I think that's really probably one of the biggest things is people just thinking before throwing.
Great advice. And since you brought up construction and demolition waste, could we, how can we address that?
So I've been working with Vineyard Vision also with that. We have a great committee, and we actually did a sort of a site in Edgartown where the house, it was a fairly new house, but luckily they decided not to tear it down, but they stripped the whole inside. And we used it as sort of, and it's still in the process, to sort of make it a project where we could look at how can we take as much out of there and reuse it. We had a group from Falmouth came over called Waste Not. They came and stripped the inside. It was amazing. In a week, they had stripped the whole thing. It looked like it had just had sheetrock put up. They took everything out. Most of that went off to CET, which is the Center for Ecotechnology. And they have a big facility up in Springfield. They were able to take that to their, they got, it's about an acre worth of building, and they take all sorts of building material in there. So they took, I think, something like 10 or 12 tons worth of material there, anything from doors to windows to, so that was all taken up there. And then other materials were sort of looked at, and we have some were given away here on the island. And so we kept an eye on that. We looked at, what were the best ways to sort of use that method of deconstructing a house versus just bringing in the wrecking ball and taking it down. So we actually hope to have a report, and even we did a video documentary of it as well. So we're hoping to use that as a sort of first step to showing other people how they can do this, and hopefully in the future that will be something that people will consider. I mean, I'm hoping in the future we'll see, not only contractors and construction people, but we'll actually see some deconstruction people who will be able to, take care of this on the island.
Liz, before I get to you, I just want to remind anybody who's attending, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will answer all of them. If you have things that you share, you can whatever you want to share, whatever you want to ask, just put it in the chat, and we'll address it. Liz.
Yeah, I actually have a question for Woody, or maybe Ben. It's something I've just wondered about for a long time. We don't have a salvage business on the island. Is that something that could be sustained here?
Well, I think, the biggest challenge is, where do you store it? And I think that's, we've been struggling with that a lot. Now, if you look at, Chicken Alley, they do a tremendous amount of business in terms of bringing stuff in and getting it out. And so, that is something that we've looked at, how to acquire a big enough facility to be able to do something like that. We did do some surveying of contractors, and there was definitely an interest in, having, reusable material for other jobs and things like that. So I think, we're still plodding along, trying to find ways to sort of expand that. I know Habitat has been advertising a lot of stuff that they have online for sale, so that, they can take those proceeds and put it into their new builds. And so, yes, that's, that would be our ultimate goal. If we could find that, that would be great. Again, maybe if somebody out there has a nice big piece of land, commercial land, maybe, we would be more than happy to float an idea for that as well.
Wow, thank you so much for that, because that really feeds a lot of thought. And there is a Rebecca. You just said something really important. I want to draw attention to is, a lot of people look upon this as a sacrifice, and if we maybe change the word sacrifice and find a different term, it might give people a different feeling about it's not that we're losing anything, it's that we're just redirecting our energies, perhaps, find positive and proactive language. So thank you for that, Rebecca. I appreciate that very much. So if anybody thinks of like other words we can use to empower people to think of this as something other than what we're trying to do is strip you of your stuff or making sacrifices that are unreasonable. These are really, really beautiful ways of recreating the world we want to live in. Ben, human waste is a huge problem, of course. What's being done to address that, and what do you think are some of the ideal ways to handle human waste?
Yeah, that's another critical one for the island. It's polluting our waterways, essentially, the Title V systems that were being put in the ground since the 90s. They did great for bacteria, but they did nothing for nitrogen. And that's something that we've realized, and the states realize this now. And of course, everybody's probably following the news that the state is considering different rules now for how municipalities have to manage their watersheds. Essentially, we're going to have to retrofit a lot of our wastewater infrastructure, from the sewer systems to the on-site in our backyards. And it's unfortunate that the Title V system was created the way it was created. I think, you could look at Anna Edie as somebody that has been railing against Title V for years for these reasons. But now the state is finally coming around and realizing that they've really created a problem and it needs to be addressed. It'll be interesting to see how the state helps pay for that, because there is a cost to retrofitting all of those systems. But the technology exists now, and it's being deployed, and it's in a provisional stage with the state on its way to general approval for use, where you can retrofit a Title V system to remove the nitrogen before it enters the water. And so that's an important thing that we're going to have to consider across the island, but it's going to be costly. And it doesn't rule out that you can also still use composting toilets and other technologies that also remove that waste. I do want to go back to the concept of like critical messaging and how do you message in a positive way or a negative way. And I know there's a general idea that like you have to have positive messaging, but there is a lot of really interesting studying now being done in that field about how do you message and how do you get people to hear things. And that anecdotal understanding of like, well, people don't want to hear negative messages, they won't respond to negative messages. The science is actually bearing out that it's the opposite. The proactive, happy-go-lucky message is not actually landing. And what is landing is fear-based messaging. Now that's easy to understand when you think about Fox News and other sort of media and how they grab eyeballs and how do they keep eyeballs. It's fear messaging. And we have to be really careful about how we create, we message within that space, because it can also be, it can freeze people, right? It can make you feel like there's nothing you can do, and you can set in a certain amount of doomerism to that. So that this balance between, if you're proactive and if you're taking action, you can have a positive impact. But the world is entering a scary place, and we have to not shy away from that, because as people understand that, they'll feel more active. But there's also science that says, look, telling everybody a bunch of stats about how bad things are, that doesn't do it either. Really, and it's kind of clear when you see this, the thing that actually influences people the most is peer pressure. What your neighborhoods are doing. That they do these mappings where they see a solar system that gets put on a roof, and then 5 years later there's a whole bunch of other solar systems around that house. And so how we act and how we see our neighbors act, that is really the biggest influence. So as an island community, the more that we do these things, the more it grows. The more somebody starts composting, their neighbor starts composting, their friends start composting. So it's that sort of proactive behavior that actually drives change, and not shying away from, look, it's scary, but we can be proactive about these things. We can take on these things. And one thing, going back to the food waste and wasted food, those are two different things, right? So there's food waste, the banana peel, the onion skin, the things that you can compost. And then there's wasted food. Born on dating is a huge problem because it's not a mandated thing that you can't eat something when the born on date is expired. That's just done as a marketing and a manufacturing ploy to just keep you buying more stuff, right? The only thing that the US Food and Drug Administration requires born on dating for is infant formula. Everything else, it's just put on by the manufacturing. And so we need to be better as consumers, knowing when the milk is so sour that you can't use it, because you can use sour milk, right? You can bake pancakes with it, or you can, make bread with it. You can do a lot of things with sour milk. So I think we have to be better informed as consumers about, not wasting food, and understand the difference between food waste and wasted food is a big piece of it as well.
Ben, thank you for bringing that up. We need to demystify the obstacles that stand in our way, maybe misconceptions and things that we were taught that are really not true. And the Climate Action Fair a week from Sunday at the Ag Hall from 12 to 4 is going to be another, just to reiterate, it's going to be a great opportunity for all of us to find these simple ways that we can make these shifts. Liz?
Yeah, I just wanted to get back to that word sacrifice. And I honestly think if we start living more lightly, which we are all going to have to do, we're going to be happier. We're going to be able to spend our time doing more meaningful things than accumulating stuff. And I think that will, and I think, as we accumulate things, as we, we're so much a materialistic society that we've lost sight of our spiritual side, and we need more of a balance between the two.
Laurel, this is Rebecca. I have my point about using the word sacrifice is not so much that it's a negative term. I agree with you, Ben. But that we need to be more proactive about exactly what you're saying, Liz, is somehow by saying I sacrificed something because I didn't buy a cashmere sweater is sort of implying that it has some value that I'm giving up, as opposed to saying, here are the things I could do to improve society, to improve my happiness. It's just using language. It's not like not saying negative things. I agree with you, Ben, but it's not also making people feel like it's too far gone. There's nothing I can do. So you've got to find this balance between motivating people to do positive things that actually are of benefit to them, as opposed to acting like they're sacrificing. Seems to be such an old religious term to me. It seems like, like let's take the lambs and sacrifice them.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So just to address questions that come up in the conversation and in the chat, it's really great to have those things addressed, but we obviously all have come from very different understandings of different words. So I think what you're saying, Rebecca, is really, thank you for clarifying that, is the idea that sacrifice is sometimes an empowering word for people, that it is like what you're saying, Liz, is it's a word that kind of frees you from the weight of obligation even, or having to feel like that. But I see what you're saying, Rebecca, that not having that cashmere sweater is a real sacrifice. However, for some people it might be, and it might feel real good for them to say, I'm willing to make that sacrifice.
Well, so Laurel, I would just throw in there, if you really want a cashmere sweater, go to the Dumtique. You'll find one. And it'll be, could be a really nice one that is barely worn. I mean, I think if we think about what's in our closets and in our basements and in our garages, we probably have enough stuff on this island to stop shopping for 10 years and not run out, right? So I think that proactive thinking, it doesn't mean that sacrifice means your life is going to be worse off. And right. There's a lot of positivity to a community that knits itself together by sharing.
Yes. And there are so many things that we can do. So as we start to kind of wrap up here, I want to get each of the panelists to kind of weigh in on what some of the ways that individuals can waste less, according to your opinion. We've talked about so many great ideas tonight, and we've talked about language, and language is always so debatable. We could talk a whole hour probably or more on just language, but I think the important things here are to figure out ways that we can all just reduce and waste less. So why don't we start with you, Alyson, and what are some ways you think we can do that?
So the obvious thing I'm going to say is, use your libraries. You can go get what you need or learn what you need to learn using the resources that are publicly available. But I think what I'm really leaning towards is get to know your community, like go to functions, meet people in person, just extend your social network, because, and we're talking about sustainability here and reducing consumption, but this is part of a fabric of, just like getting ourselves as resilient as possible for like worst case scenario. We live in an island. We are very vulnerable. When the worst happens, you're not going to have the luxury of time to try to figure out where you need to go for X. But the more people you have in your life, and like the more robust your social network is here, you're going to know who to go to, even when the phone lines are down, even when the electricity goes out. And the more robust your social network, the more access you have to the things that they know and the things that they have. If it wasn't for having a group of parents in our life, our child would be naked. So that's what I would say, just like get out there and have a good time with the people who are here, and, lean into the fact that, we are all here living human lives. We all have things that we can share with each other.
Thank you, Alyson. Mary Sage?
Yeah, I think number one thing, food waste or otherwise, is really just taking the time to reconsider what even is trash, and that the trash does not mean the place you put things just because you're done with them. Food especially, but lots of things go in the trash that don't need to. I would encourage people, Ben mentioned the difference between food waste and wasted food is a really crucial one. I think the question of what actual food is going wasted can be addressed, at least personally at home, with something of a waste audit. Like, start separating your food waste, put it in a separate compost bin, see what you are seeing a lot of them in there. If there's something that could or should have been edible that you missed, and see if maybe you can change your behaviors around that. Otherwise, there absolutely will always be some scraps, the peels, the cores, the coffee grounds, that those belong in the compost bin, and those can be recycled. They don't need to be wasted. And then I think really also in the big picture, we all do have an individual responsibility to reduce our consumption and our waste, but there's only so much we can do as individuals without policy and infrastructure to support those choices. Unfortunately, there's a lot of components of our systems that make it cheaper and easier to be more wasteful than less wasteful. Of course, Woody is working very diligently on that, and I think many other people in our community are, but I think it's important to remember that we have power, particularly at the hyper-local level, to impact what that policy looks like and what infrastructure is available here. So we've seen students make incredible progress with things like straw-free MV, and we adults can do that too. So if you see something in your own say workplace or industry that you would like to see changed, I would just encourage people to try to do so.
Thank you, Mary Sage. Woody?
Well, since everybody said something, I would say, I'm going to flip it around. Mine's going to be a little more selfish, but it's for the ultimate good. Anybody out there who wants to help us finance this infrastructure, we need your help. This is a great way to, and we have a lot of different ways to do it. So, please, that's something that, we can look at. Also, if there are any good database programmers out there or things like that, I would like to work to build a resource database in this island. First, to trade everything from C&D materials, but there's so much stuff, clothing, all sorts of things. I know we have Facebook, although I'm not a social media person, but I know those are there. But I think something specifically designed with the intent to share, to be able to give things away, or even to make a little money out of it, just something that takes it out of the waste stream. So that's
Thank you, Woody. Thank you so much. And Ben?
I'm going to follow up with Mary Sage. I think collective action is something that we need to really focus on, and let's just focus on the island for a moment and think about the elimination of single use, right? Single use straws, single use, coffee cups. But how about the takeout containers, right? I mean, we could, as an island, create policies and mandate that restaurants that have takeout containers figure out how to do a reusable system, right? We have Island Eats, which is piloting a program and showing how that can be done. There could be others that are doing other things in that field. I think those are important collective actions that we can decide as a community how we want the island to function. Look, the County of Los Angeles has done this, right? New York is doing this. Paris, France is doing this. I mean, there's no reason we can't, as an island with our controlled geography, put those policies in place. So I think developing policies so that it isn't on the backs of an individual to know what to do is the only way we get out of this, because everything that we said tonight has to be done. It has to be done. If we don't do these things, we won't make it out of this problem. And so all of these things have to be done. And the timeline to do them is getting shorter and shorter every day. So those big policy decisions have to be made as an island.
This is extremely important, what you're saying, Ben, as far as we need to put the pressure on. We need to understand the urgency here. And I will tell you that Island Eats MV, after 1 year, they had a successful pilot. And I had on the Vineyard Current yesterday, if you want to go into the archives, you can listen to the complete interview at mvyradio.org. Jessica Mason, who founded that, has received a grant, and now they are fully fledged open. They have an app now that they use that everybody can now get. Everybody can now be able to use their stainless steel bowls and get their takeouts with all of that. So there's 12 restaurants on the island so far, and there's a wait list. So it's really exciting that is now, again, needs people to use it in order for it to be sustained. And another opportunity. So thanks for bringing that up, Ben. I really appreciate that. And also, Liz, before I have you make some closing remarks and also give us your advice, Nikolai, just wanted to say thank you for your note in the chat about the fact that we need to continue to put the pressure on and contact our local reps, who are very responsive, by the way, Dylan Fernandez and Julian Sear. But if we continue to communicate with them, it's definitely has our voices heard on that grand scale. And we're doing it with housing. We need to do it with climate action too. So thank you for that, Nicola. And Liz, what would you like to add as we close out here?
Well, thank you for this forum, because really, Laurel, what we need to do is talk about this more. And this is what this program is allowing us to do, to talk to the community about these things and to get the message out. And I think it's critical. So thank you again. The word that is in my head right now is plastic. As we move too slowly toward renewable energy, but as we move away from fossil fuels, the fossil fuel industry is ramping up their production of plastic. And plastic, microplastics we're inhaling them, and we're breathing them, and we're eating them, and they're in our lung and stream, and we don't know yet how that's affecting our bodies, but it's not going to be in a good way. So we really have to be aware of that. And finally, I just want to say that on this topic, last year we had a Climate Action Week, which was really about educating the community about climate issues. This year on Climate Action Day is really about inspiring the community to take action. And one of the things we're having is a mending hub where people can come and learn how to mend their clothes so they don't throw them away. We're going to have a bike repair hub so people can come and get their bikes repaired so they don't have to toss them and buy a new bike. You can bring your electric bill and talk to a solar consultant about how to go about getting rebates to put solar panels on your house. There's going to be a lot going on, and the idea is to inspire the community to all take actions to help us become a more resilient island.
Thank you so much, Liz, and everybody. And that's again happening May 7th, a week from this Sunday, at the Ag Hall from 12 to 4. Go to the vineyardway.org if you want to go deeper into the dive of this. I want to thank everybody who's participated tonight by showing up, bringing up really important points, Nicola and Ruth and Rebecca and Kathy. You've really added a lot to the discussion. And I do want to draw your attention to the chat, if you can save it, because there's a lot of great information that's been shared there. And Alyson just put down some information about a database information in the chat as well that will be very useful. Thank you, Alyson. I appreciate that. And the panelists, thank you for being so knowledgeable and so active in our community and doing these very important steps for us to simplify things for those of us who don't know how or where to start. And you're making it very, very easy, and you're removing all these psychological obstacles. So once again, thank you so much for coming. Next week, we are going to have this a new panel that is going to address the managed retreat from the coast. And we're going to have Liz and Kara Shemeth and James Lengyel. Ben is going to come back and join us, and Rob Young, as well as other panelists. And you will be able to see this in our archives or on our community outreach page by tomorrow night. And you will be able to see the community, the flyer for the community action fair at thevineyardway.org. So without further ado, thank you so much for your time. I know we went a little over tonight, but it is, we can't put a time limit on talking about important things like this. So thank you very, very much, everybody. And we'll see you next week at 7:00. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel.
Thanks, Laurel.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right.